Hello and a warm welcome to the CNBC Africa Special. I'm Gugulethu Cele, and today we come to you from what is the 5th edition of the East3Route Investment Seminar being held in the island of Mahe on the Seychelles Islands. Well, today we have the wonderful opportunity to interact with all four of the economies that make up the East3Route investment case, and we'll continue interrogating not only the investment opportunity possessed by all four of these economies, but also looking at the regional progress that can be achieved by common workmanship, as well as economic reforms and policies that can be implemented in order to bolster economic growth for all four economies, as well as the rest of the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed panel of guests who make up the various ministers of the East3Route economies. I'd like to begin by introducing the first minister to my left, Honourable Minister Michael Benstrong, who is the Minister for Investment, Entrepreneurship Development and Business Innovation in the Seychelles.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us, sir. The Permanent Secretary of the Ministry for Culture and Tourism in Mozambique, Minister Domingos do Rosario, Artur. The Honourable MEC for Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, Minister Michael Mabuyakhulu, as well as the Honourable Minister Gideon Dlamini, Minister of Commerce, Industry and Trade in the Kingdom of Swaziland. Ministers, thank you so much for joining us today. We have certainly had an insightful discussion throughout the course of the day, looking at various industries and sectors which are prime for development. But we also will have active participation from our audience members who join us here today, making up various stakeholders who want to participate in actively being involved in the grooming and development of the East3Route economies. I'd like us to start by taking a look at the GDP figures. South Africa, unfortunately, does come in at the lower end of the scale, driven by several issues and impacts that were highlighted rather in the presentation today, with GDP figures expected to be around 2% for 2015. If we look at the likes of Mozambique, however, a lot stronger, with ongoing prospects for continued investment in infrastructure driven by the government, expected to post growth rates of between 7.6% to 8.1% going forward. Swaziland at 2.5%, as well as the Seychelles at 3.8%. When we look at the economic landscape of the East3Route economies, is it all based on a GDP story, or do we need to interrogate the fundamentals that can potentially unlock further economic growth, job development, as well as cultivate stronger ties between these four economies, as well as the rest of the African continent? Minister Benstrong, let's start with you.
Good afternoon. I believe the East3Route will bring benefits for the development of cooperation and trade. And especially, for example, in the Seychelles context, we want to empower our Seychellois to take charge of the entrepreneurship development. And I believe as we move forward, the East3Route will give an additional vehicle for us to be able to exchange in terms of raw material, in terms of ICT, in terms of human resources development. And I believe the East3Route will give that vehicle so that we can improve on the trade concept within the region, which is, we are so close in terms of distance, but we are yet to improve on the connectivity for that to happen.
Minister Artur, maybe if we can come to you, maybe from a Mozambican's perspective, it's easier to refer to the GDP numbers because of the fact that they're relatively high to your counterparts. But is it all about the numbers or identifying new industries?
The tourism in Mozambique is one of major sector for the development of the nation. We observe the East3Route as one important vehicle also to promote our cross-border tourism, but our philosophy is that when we are two or more, we can do more and better. That's why we joined our efforts to be together in order to achieve our objectives. Unions to grow of the not only to grow of the development, but also to increase unions the job creation, not only the official or formal job, but mainly the informal job in the village, where the project visit the community, the rural areas visited by the initiative of East3Route. There we have many informal jobs created with the art and craft and other activities, other rural, other local traditions that are made. I think we have many other possibilities to create more and new opportunities to give the younger people to be trained, to get more and new experiences, to promote this area of tourism and increase our economy. The numbers are there. The challenge is to increase them.
MEC Mabuyakhulu, I'm sure you echo these sentiments. The challenge is to increase the numbers.
Well, let me start by saying that the first point, that the East3Route is a theater. For us, the region is a stage. The member countries are actors. And all of this has to be harnessed together, and we must play it in unison. And therefore, our starting point, which goes back to why the East3Route was, in the first instance, established, is that we have realized that there is therefore a need for all of us to work together in a synergistic manner, collaborating with one another, but also beyond that, whilst looking at the other areas of promoting trade or areas of attracting investments, but also being able to ensure that at the core of this is our people, because it is the ordinary citizens of our member countries that get to be affected. They are either afflicted by poverty, by unemployment and inequality. And this is a common feature. And therefore we have to act and act together. So I want therefore to go back to your earlier question, that what about the GDP numbers? Of course, I think we should look at the GDP numbers, but we must understand them in context. And I think Johan made it point quite very clearly in his presentation, that whilst you would see others growing much more faster, which we welcome, but we must understand that the economic baselines are not the same. If you take the South African economy, it's by far still the biggest economy in sub-Saharan Africa, of course second to Nigeria. It is therefore important for us that we would like to grow to a 5% by 2019 as South Africa, but we understand therefore that because of our huge big baseline, it's going to require us to focus on a number of other things. So I don't want to touch those now. But it's therefore important that we don't focus solely on the GDP numbers. We also focus on practical actions that we are taking. To what extent are we opening up our economies for further investment? To what extent are we attracting foreign direct investments? To what extent are we saying to people who want to diversify out of the Chinese market, which the bubble is beginning to burst in some instances, who are looking for investments elsewhere in the world? How do these economies, on a common basis, are able to get a share of that so that we can also create employment, that we can be able to deal with the challenges of poverty and unemployment? So I'm saying already as governments, we realize that through developing a cyclical approach to economic development, we therefore have to invest in areas that requires the state to invest, so that we create both the pull and the push factors for private sector investment. So we are very clear. So looking at what Jennifer and Johan presented earlier today, we do see areas where we can now collaborate, and areas that would actually take us to a higher level. That is why we're saying the East3Route, insofar as we're concerned, is a theater, the region is a stage, and the member countries are actors. We have to act and act together.
Implementation is key. We'll revisit that topic in a moment when we take a look at practical steps and measures that have been put in place to encourage the level of trade, tourism and investment across all four economies. Minister Dlamini, to get your voice into the conversation, sir, your view on the numbers. As several of your colleagues have echoed, it's not just about what the Prince revealed today.
Thank you so much, Kokuletu. And taking the floor for the first time, perhaps I need to acknowledge the warm hospitality by the Republic of Seychelles. And thank you very much, Honorable Minister, to your government as well, and on behalf of my delegation as well, inclusive of business sector, the media and government officials. So we are very comfortable and very much at home, and we're actually planning our next tourist visit, just to visit Seychelles now, yes. But beyond that, I think the issue of GDP and just the general statistics figures that we have, I think I can remember, I think the economic report that we got also suggested that our figures also are wanting in terms of us having the capacity to capture the statistics accurately and localize them. And at the moment, we talk more about the global statistics and performance figures, and we are being told by other global entities in terms of what our economic growth rate figures are, and we are not ourselves hands-on in terms of understanding ourselves. So in that respect, I think there's an issue to address this so that we are more evidence-based in terms of how we do business, so that we can have the figures in our fingertips. But having said that, one of the suppressing factor, and there are suppressing factors and opportunities at the same time, East3Route presents an opportunities to boost these figures, as well as the related other regional and continental free trade area initiatives that are being taken. Because one of the things that suppresses the figures currently is the cost of import and export, precisely because we are not trading much between and amongst ourselves. So a lot of the time, what we wear, the gadgets we use, what I'm holding in my hands is probably exported or imported from a very faraway country to get to me. It now takes the money away that I would have used for other development things in terms of availability of money. And me selling again to faraway markets also escalates the cost of delivery and transportation. So I think that an initiative like this one, strengthening our regional and sub-regional initiatives, one of the key resultant positive thing would actually be growth in our GDP figures, precisely because we can trade less costly in many ways in terms of people travel, transport, as well as travel of goods. But one of the areas perhaps that we need as well to exploit is just understanding ourselves in terms of facilitating the travel itself. I think we are here again to interrogate those issues, because sometimes someone was telling me, for example, I think my honorable minister was saying flying to here, I had to fly via Dubai. So those are some of the issues that we need to deal with so that we can be more efficient and understand one another. I'm aware that currently there is an initiative under SADC to say, why don't all the SADC countries, for example, have a platform where we can all watch each other's television at no cost to the viewer, so that we can understand one another. Have a mobile service provider, for example, system that will allow us to talk to one another without an added cost, because now I'm in South Africa, I'm in Mozambique, I'm elsewhere. So I wish that what might also come out of this discussion is really affordable cost to communication and investment in technology to boost that. So by and large, I think those are some of the key areas that we need to exploit. Thank you.
I'm happy you've touched on that, because I hope that there's an air of excitement here, given the fact that we had earlier conversations with representatives from each of the countries as well, who alluded to the fact that the opportunities are abound in airlift as a strategy to help boost the economic growth of these nations, the blue economy as well as upskilling individuals and appropriate investment. But it all goes back down to a common theme that we've seen in several of the discussions taking place today, which is government economic policy. On those policies that you've alluded to, Mr. Dlamini, to have that SADC region television to take place and a mobile operator to be able to perform its skills and level of ICT service across these economies, are we finding that the paperwork speaks to each other and that we are not lost in our languages and misinterpretation of the law for selfish interests? Honourable Minister, I'd like to come to you.
In fact, we are happy with the figures and the level of the economic growing. But the most important also for us is to regard for the impact of this economic growing for the life of the community. That's why I'm talking about the local communities, how the growing economic is reflected in the life of the welfare of our communities. That is also very, very important.
Minister, if I may step in there for a moment, as you mentioned, you need to focus on the local communities, but you need the foreign direct investment, and you also require the partnership of these fellow African economies. Are we on the right track yet when you have several policies such as black economic empowerment, localization, or either way, it all relates to the same thing, which is that individuals of those countries need to benefit from the foreign direct investment that's coming in. Are we on the right track yet, or do we still need to see changes? MEC and Minister?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. First and foremost, you pursue an economic interest for the benefit of your own citizens and of your own country. If you were to pursue economic objectives for the sake of economic objectives, it will serve no purpose. You might have growth, but to whose benefit are you talking about, that growth? So we should be able to talk about shared growth. And for that reason, we as SADC countries in the main, first and foremost, have realized the need for us to build a common market. And indeed, we have taken a very bold initiative to establish a free trade area. In the same way that there's NAFTA, in the same way we've got a Eurozone, in the same way that there's now new negotiations that would include the Caribbeans that are now taking place. But we have even gone further to say, talking about a market share that would include 15 countries in SADC with almost plus 250 million population might in itself not be sufficient enough. We need now to talk about how to partner as a region together with other regions in the continent. And hence, therefore, on the 10th of June in Egypt, there was this discussion, which is a partnership between SADC, COMESA, and the EAC, the East African Communities. Now, what that means clearly is that we have an intention of actually building a bigger market share that would have a total GDP output of $1.3 trillion US dollars, 26 countries participating, almost 600 million population, and it's almost more than 60% of the African market share. Now, it's a very clear intention from where we're standing that when you have a free trade area, there are certain things that you will have to do and do them together. However, as we have seen in the Eurozone, you don't have a prepared script that you can simply go there and simply say, we now have learned from the Eurozone because the Greece crisis, the Portuguese crisis, the Spanish crisis, the Italian crisis, the Ireland crisis, and many other crises is telling you that whilst you want to build a common market, but you can't do that blindly. And therefore, there have to be certain considerations which are well thought out, which are rational, that you take. Otherwise, you would actually burden everybody. So from a point of view of developing a bigger common market, it is important. But I think it would be remiss of me if I don't then deal with the issue around the question of what we term in South Africa a radical economic shift or transformation. Meaning, we have to be able to focus around the issues of localization and the ensuring that there is higher local content in terms of the economy. We want to partner with strategic investors who are coming outside of the African continent. But we must also ensure that Africans and our own people are also ultimate beneficiaries. Otherwise, if we don't do that, you would have a new wave of colonialization. Albeit people will actually refer to their current leaders that at a time when they were supposed to be part of the rebuilding of their own continents and their own economies, we therefore created a situation where they become spectators in the game that is played in their own backyard. And it would be very difficult for us to answer. Now, I'm therefore making that proposition in the sense that as South Africa in particular, and in KZN, we are bold enough in saying there is no contradiction in focusing on issues of economic empowerment as long as they are done on the basis of creating an equilibrium, a win-win for the international investors and for our own people, because it is only when we all are practically beneficiaries, then we can talk about an economy that creates opportunities for us all, that works for us all. And that is the ultimate test. Any government that does not take care of its own, that government is a government that governs not with the will of the people. It governs for its own selfish interest.
Minister Benstrong, if I can come to you, is this easier maybe to implement in a smaller population group like the Seychelles?
Thank you. I will take it from where Michael have left. It is very important for us to take stock that your question is, are we talking? The answer is yes, but it's still in the early days. The signing in Egypt only happened early this year, I think somewhere in April or May. And many African countries have signed that treaty. So that's mean we are talking to each other. And it doesn't matter. If it takes us 2 or 3 hours to decide where to put a comma in a sentence, let it be. But the important thing is that we are speaking to each other. In the context of Seychelles being a very small economy, but again small and big in heart, I will take the example of the blue economy, our tuna industry. Seychelles is a very important hub for the transshipment of tuna. And we are finding it's getting more involved in trade within the African continent. We have seen an increase in trade with Ghana, for example, with Mauritius. And this is just an example. This is only the start. And I believe as we keep on talking, as we keep on opening our market, as we keep on understanding each other, I sincerely believe that the trade will be successful within the African continent. It will be good tomorrow, instead of us with our card that we use for payment, instead of using Visa or MasterCard, we have a brand for Africa. And that will be super. And as it has been mentioned here, is that the cost, let it be, it can be free. Instead of spending dollars to international corporation or company, we have to do it for Africa. And we believe that Africa, the region, SADC, COMESA, East3Route, we do have the potential. In Seychelles being on a smaller scale, we have seen that possible. We have seen that we have made it happen. For example, with the co-share of our airline, Air Seychelles, we have built up a regional. We are now flying to many countries within the region, which go to the east coast to Tanzania. We are connected to Kenya. We are connected to South Africa. We are connected to Indian Ocean, Réunion, Mauritius, Madagascar, and Comoro. And this is all with the drive to improve the connectivity within the region. The port is one area where we are still lacking behind. And I'm sure with that talking going on, we will reach our target soon.
Well, we certainly hope so. We're going to take a short ad break, but when we return, we want to explore the excitement that we heard about earlier on. So clearly the discussions are taking place with regard to the commerce and the economic policies that need to be implemented. But after the break, we'll take a look at the new areas of economic development that have been highlighted. We heard about the blue economy from Minister Benstrong. We'll also take a look at infrastructure development as well as capitalizing on the youth. Don't go anywhere. There's more right after this. Welcome back to the CNBC Africa special, taking a look at the East3Route Investment Seminar for 2015. I'm still joined by the ministers of the East3Route economies, the Minister for Investment and Entrepreneurship Development, as well as Business Innovation for the Seychelles, Honorable Minister Michael Benstrong, Minister Domingos do Rosario Artur, who's the Permanent Secretary for the Minister of Culture and Tourism in Mozambique, not forgetting MEC Michael Mabuyakhulu, who is the MEC for Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as Swaziland's Honorable Minister Gideon Dlamini, Minister for Commerce, Industry and Trade in Swaziland. Now, before the break, we spoke about the hardcore issues, which unfortunately do need to be taken at a national level and obviously have long-term ripple effects, but nonetheless, conversations are taking place and progress is being made. But I want us to reflect on some of the conversations we had earlier on today, which come towards the drive for infrastructure, as well as a renewed interest in new economies being focused. The likes of the blue economy, which Seychelles can surely capitalize on, together with other industries and the benefit thereof. Mozambique as well, with the heavy investment in oil and gas, as well as the growth potentials that might be presented by that. Not forgetting infrastructure as well, where we've seen with Swaziland and in KZN, where there's a lot of investment taking place with regard to the ports, as well as development of railway services and corridors to actually facilitate this particular investment and trade between the four economies. Minister Artur, if we can come to you for a moment, just to give us a quick overview on the potentials that this has to unlock value for the East3Route economies.
Of course, as my colleague said this morning, traditionally Mozambique was a service provider. That's give us the opportunity to develop many infrastructures, mainly the routes in the three many corridors in Mozambique. We take this opportunity to participate on the East3Route initiative to promote other potentiality in Mozambique through the tourism. We have not only the beaches, but we have also the forests, we have the reserve, many things, many opportunities. That's why that we are putting out through this project, this initiative, East3Route. The main challenge at the moment is to promote the infrastructures in this domain of tourism. That's why all our policies is is oriented to increase the promotion of the investments for private sector and the others, national and the foreigners investment. That's why we are created more facilities. I think Mozambique is one of the countries where it is very easy to implement an investment. If you have money, you are welcome in Mozambique. There are many facilities as they removed the barriers, tax barriers, and the other many facilities to initiate a project on tourism.
Having said that, though, you mentioned something so interesting, which is obviously capitalizing on the fact that this is a region, which was alluded to in an earlier conversation and speaker earlier on today. Minister Dlamini, to come to you, is this not a potential where if the region approaches individuals who have the capital as well as the infrastructure ability to build corridors that will connect Swaziland to the ports, not only in Maputo, but also in KZN, which will also facilitate trade with the Seychelles, surely this presents a more opportune theme here? Is this a conversation that is also being facilitated and taking place, the regional approach?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, indeed, because at the end of the day, infrastructure facilitates both the transportation of goods and as well as the people. So for business to take place and also be facilitated, the infrastructure in general terms has to be good. And we are probably aware that throughout the SADC region, COMESA and Africa as a whole, infrastructure has been prioritized. So it's a matter that needs to take place at a national level, but also at regional level, because most of the infrastructure such as air, rail, road, especially in terms of transport, it requires, if in matching it with today's theme in terms of cross-border, it requires that we collaborate in terms of creating the necessary infrastructure. Actually, in Swaziland, in line with the theme, and as well as the general trend in Africa as a growing economy, and in terms of the liberalization and integration of trade, we have already stated that we have built a new airport exactly to facilitate that. And as I'm here, I'm also discussing with my colleagues about how best to utilize that airport for both goods, services, as well as people, so that that airport it's got massive potential and capability. And we're also working with our colleagues, especially from the South African side, in terms of developing the rail linkages and the road linkages. And one of the other areas as well that we are currently investing in is working together with the private sector, because a lot of the time infrastructure development, it's a vision driver, because once we have the vision, then you can build the infrastructure even for a demand that is not there yet. But once the infrastructure is there, then business will see room to participate there. But in terms of building the infrastructure itself, it needs financing, capitalization, etc., etc. And that is where a lot of the time perhaps we need to look at private-public sector partnerships in terms of both financing as well as even conceptualizing what needs to be done. A lot of the time we go look for capital even outside our continent. And a lot of the time, again, there is even more money within the region and we don't know it. And sometimes there is money even within the country itself and we don't know it. For example, we have one of the figures in Swaziland were showing us that actually the financial institutions in Swaziland and those that are dealing in the money market are actually exporting the money and investing it in other investments outside the country. At the same time, we are looking for investors, even financiers from outside the country. And we are currently working on how to bridge that gap, to use local resources as well. And that is where we really need, because the capital is from internally as well as the whatever comes out of the capital in terms of profits, cost of capital and benefits is also circulated internally. Otherwise, if you borrow money from outside, then you have to pay both the capital and the interest, escalate your outflows in terms of cash. So both are important, but I think that one of the experiences is that we have not adequately exploited how much and where the sources of capital may be obtained, even at a local level, nationally, and even from our neighbors, and using our own financial institutions, both nationally and in the region. So in that way, I think that it's a cause for thinking brightly in terms of the future. But one of the things that one might mention as well is the whole thing of beneficiating our raw materials in terms of both minerals, mining, agriculture, and otherwise.
If I may interject there, is it not a bit too late to do that, given the fact that many of the natural resources and the production companies that are based in these economies, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, have taken a significant knock on the back of the fact that commodity prices have seen a significant fall off. Even in Mozambique, some oil companies are not necessarily digging in their rigs just yet because of the fact that the oil price has plummeted from its levels that we've seen previously. So whilst that is a plan, is it a bit too little too late, given the fact that we want to beneficiate, but getting those minerals out of the ground now already proves to be quite an expensive task?
Yeah, beneficiation for Africa is just starting, because what we have been doing was exporting all the raw materials even out of Africa, and we now want to process it in Africa. So I think that's an area that is very virgin, and we need all of us to put at national and as well as at the regional and continental level, which will again justify why we need to develop our infrastructure, including ICT infrastructure, so that we can communicate, we can know where the markets are, and we can know where the raw materials, the value addition materials are. So currently, I think the figures will show that we're trading more with outside the continent than within the continent. So I think that beneficiation is almost just starting for many economies and almost for the whole of Africa. There is a huge potential there.
I'd like us to zone into some of the new industries that we're also hoping to unlock and tap into, which will have a benefit as well for African economies, which has to be the blue economy. Seychelles is well known for having, 1.3 million square kilometers of sea available for it to make use of. Not only that, but South Africa has also implemented Operation Pakisa. Are there linkages between these two particular policies which will continue to drive that tuna, perhaps from the Seychelles to the dinner tables of South Africans, Swazis and Mozambicans alike? Minister Benstrong, let's start with you before MEC Mabuyakhulu.
Yep. In terms of building up the infrastructure, Seychelles have been well known in the tourism industry, and we have done very well in building the necessary infrastructures that are to happen. And currently we want to diversify it, and this is where we have embarked on the initiative of the blue economy development. The tuna industry is not new to Seychelles. We have been processing and building up the infrastructure to create the main hub for tuna transshipment. And as you mentioned, this is taking the advantage of the huge area of sea that we have and the limited space that we have in terms of land. In terms of the blue economy, we want to take it to the next level. As we move forward in the processing of tuna, in terms of export, we do it in two ways. We process in can, we export, and we export as a whole fish tuna. And as you mentioned, we may have to, we can trade with the region, like it was mentioned this morning, is we can ship tuna this morning at 8, and it will be at the dinner table in KwaZulu-Natal or in Swaziland. But for this to happen, we have to put in place the right infrastructure. Seychelles want to bring the blue economy into the next level, as I mentioned, is to improve the processing of the fish, the stock of fish that we catch in the region, and it is transshipped in Seychelles. So this will be the added value, and the added value will create more wealth to Seychelles, and it will make our product more attractive. This is an issue which, as my colleague from Swaziland have mentioned, it's high time for Africa to start building the right infrastructure and the right technology to process, to add value to the raw material that is found heavily in our region. And I believe this is what will create an Africa which will be more dependent on itself, and it will be an area where the African continent can increase its wealth compared to what we've been doing now is just get the raw material, export, and then we re-import the finished product at a higher price. In terms of Seychelles, the blue economy, we not only are looking at tuna, we are also doing all exploration in our region, because we believe there is potential for us to find sometimes in the near future.
Despite the fact that recent results show that there isn't much oil in this region?
But it's amazing, the interest for exploration is still high. There's still companies who are coming to Seychelles to negotiate for them to have an area for exploitation. Because I believe the oil price, in the near future, it will go up. And I believe those companies who are heavily involved believe that there will be benefit, there will be dividend to be reaped from oil in the future. Yes, it is low today, but in the long run, who knows, it might go up, and they are getting themselves ready for that.
MEC Mabuyakhulu, if you can give us insights on Operation Phakisa, which I understand fundamentally is slightly different compared to what the Seychelles economy has in mind for its blue economy.
Well, let me start by saying that if you look at where we are as the member countries of the East3Route in terms of trade with one another, it's important to actually say that we already have got a positive base from which we can operate. The trade between ourselves and Seychelles, as we speak right now, is at about 54 million. And we can do better than that, of course, understanding the market size we are dealing with. The trade between ourselves and Swaziland is almost about 56 billion. We also have got a very growing trade between ourselves and Mozambique. So the point, therefore, that I'm actually saying, we can build on these positive numbers, but we have to do certain things and do them right. One of those is a question of ensuring, because the way you do business today, it is about agility and speed. It's no longer the question of the big devouring the small. It's about who can have access to market and have access quicker in reaching those markets. In other words, it's important for us to be able to actually adopt such a strategy. Coming back to the blue economy, in particular, our own point of departure is KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Is the one that we have got a huge coastline. Of course, it may not be as big as the Mozambican coastline, which is more than 3,000, but the opportunities, therefore, are immense. What Operation Phakisa, which was ably explained by Mr. Mutsohai this morning, is succinctly then says to us, we should be able to look for big, fast results, relying on the Malaysian model. And that what it then tells us is that how have we been able to exploit the opportunities that our oceans provide to us? The first thing that we have taken a very definitive decision on as KZN, as part of the Operation Phakisa, is that we have identified the areas of our competitive and comparative advantages within Operation Pakis, because we want to bite and bite in sizable chunks. The second thing that we have done, we've said, in Richards Bay, what are the things that we would see coming up there? One of those is to focus Richards Bay around the question of the gas hub. In other words, Mozambique, our neighbor, have got quite a huge reserves with regard to 375 TSF of gas reserves that they have. They now have got a gas pipe that is now in Maputo. And we believe, therefore, being a closer neighbor, we should be able to tap into that and begin to use the Richards Bay as a hub where you process gas and where we can actually be able to do business out of that. The second thing is actually, of course, the whole area around your ship repair, oil rigs, and ourselves together with Saldanha, and a point made as well this morning that we have got the biggest meter draft in terms of that harbour. And we should therefore position ourselves succinctly to be able to use that. But we're not just only relying on that from a business point of view, but we also want to talk about gas to power. In other words, the question of ensuring that with the current challenge that we have of energy in the country, if we take ourselves in the next 30 years, South Africa has developed a strategy that we want to reduce our reliance, heavy reliance, on fossil fuels, which is about 87% in terms of power generation as we speak, to about 47% by year 2030. That can only materialize because we would be actually bringing in the energy mix in terms of our co-generation. And that therefore becomes important. As for the question of the building a vibrant industry, you're required to have institutionalized system of developing skills. We are therefore moving to establish a maritime institute as KZN. We are converting one of our existing public entities, the KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board, to make it also a maritime institute. So it allows us to become competitive. How does it happen in the world that 1 in every four seafarers are Filipinos or Indonesian? They have grown because they focus around the issue of skills and skills development. And we have taken that very bold decision to go there. So if I were to then conclude, when you look at the issues of infrastructure, between ourselves and Swaziland in particular, we have got a 17 billion rand project, which is moving from Lotha in Mpumalanga province, going through Swaziland and having a railway line that will go to Richards Bay. It's a huge investment which, as we speak, is already under operation. And we're anticipating if everything goes well, it could be finished by 2016. The same thing when we actually started the East3Route. Between ourselves and Mozambique, there is a road between Kosi Bay and Ponta de Oro to Maputo. And when we started discussing with that route, and it was a road that was very bad. And we are glad that our sister brothers and our sisters and brothers from Mozambique are now building a bridge in Guatembe, which will then move that road into us construction and development. So when we speak about opening up the region in terms of infrastructure, there are already visible signs. Over and above that, we also have got the North and South committee of infrastructure that our own president is heading on behalf of the AU. So clearly speaking, we now need to deal with certain areas. One of those are how our ports are working together and collaborating one another to boost volume, instead of looking at ourselves as competitors. The second one is to look at the question of the airlift and air connectivity. Between these other countries, we've already discussed between ourselves and our colleagues, both in the Seychelles, a direct link between Seychelles and Durban would be viable, and we think we should be. A direct link increasing the frequency between ourselves as well as Maputo, which is something that we are working towards, is viable. We are working on some ideas between ourselves and Swaziland to boost the volumes. So we are now taking our discussions beyond just a statement of intent to fruition. And indeed, the East3Route is about implementation. It's about us as the various countries being actors, taking that vision and implementing it so that the results are seen. But my departing point would be, I'm sitting in KwaZulu-Natal alone, despite that we know that the global economy and growth is still very sluggish internationally and globally. But I'm sitting with a project pipeline of more than 250 billion of possible investment. 100 billion project pipeline in the Richards Bay ITZ, more than 10 billion in the IDP, In South Coast, in Hipperdine, I'm sitting with 35 billion. Inland was Ladysmith and Newcastle, I'm sitting at 24 billion. And clearly, the investment community believes that Africa is the next frontier for growth. What is required is for us to therefore develop a symbiotic relationship between us in governments as well as the private sector, but ensuring that we therefore bring in communities, because I insist on the issue that the economy, for it to work and work well, it has to work for the benefit of all its citizens. If it does not do that, it is an issue of the elite sitting amongst the table for themselves and carving the cake for their own benefit, and it will not work for the masses.
MEC, I also want us to venture into that topic regarding the capital investment and, more importantly, the particular incentives that need to be provided for here, because it almost seems as though when you speak to these business owners and representatives of the private sector, you need to give them further assurances about the return that they can make on their investment, but they also need to invest slightly further. Some say that when corporate companies enter the African continent, they almost need to extend their perimeter, not only bring your operations and facilitate it in these African states, but upskill the people, take care of their health, ensure that you also participate actively in the logistical development of the moving and transfer of your goods. And maybe if we can close off with that in particular. Active measures that we can hold you accountable to with regard to developments in progressing the East3Route economies, and not only just for leisure, but as viable, sustainable economic hubs of the future. Minister Benstrong, a minute for each response, by the way.
Thank you. Like it was said before, the treaty many African countries have signed a treaty at a very high level, which is the tripartite, which includes SADC, COMESA, and EAC. But I believe what's been signed at that level will be translated further down, and it will reach the East3Route level. And yes, there are provisions in that treaty which make it to happen, as you say, business, business, business. There are provisions in that treaty which will make travel or access to different countries for business purposes very easy. It is all in the context of ease of doing business. And I believe it's still in early days. It's still at a very high level. Governments are talking to each other. And I'm sure the treaty has been signed. As we move forward in the implementation of the treaty, the East3Route will benefit hugely from that treaty. And yes, it will happen, but like I've said, it's still early days in that matter.
Minister Artur?
Thank you.
A minute for the response.
I agree with the participants that talk about which kind of potentiality we have to show for others. We have to promote the potentiality as our country. We have opportunity for business, but the leisure also is business. The tourism is a very big industry. That depends on what we are talking about. But I agree, we have to continue to think about what kind of product we have to show of all of the countries of the world. But let me talk shortly about
I'd like us to focus on the action, unfortunately, Minister, due to time pressures. If I can move along to the MEC Mabuyakhulu, just because of the time pressures, but hopefully we will continue to engage on this going forward. MEC, the action and measurable things that we can hold you accountable to together with your peers.
Absolutely. I think the issue around the East3Route being an action-driven partnership is important for all of us. What we will be doing is that, of course, following today's seminar, tomorrow we have got a ministerial session where his ministers will be discussing quite a number of issues. Part of those issues that we'll be discussing is to actually concretize and firm up an action plan that is arising out of this seminar, which we will then be announcing at the media briefing that we would have after our ministerial session. The second thing that we would want to say is that we also want to harp on the issue of partnership, because action must be driven by all social partners. In our case, we're saying there is government's role, And we are going to be delineating what governments and governments' interventions should be all about. There should be then roles for social part, for business, for civil society, but for organized labor. In that regard, you therefore actually move away from a situation where there are others who are making demand of others and yet you are sitting and not doing anything. We can't do, as government, that which must be done by the private sector. And vice versa, the private sector cannot do that which must be done by us as governments.
Minister Dlamini, your closing comments, briefly?
Yes, thank you very much. One of the things that perhaps we, at our level, is the issue of creating an environment that will allow action to take place. And the issue of a secretariat for the East3Route initiative is very, very important. Otherwise, without that coordinating office, we will just be meeting and going back to our respective countries, waiting to meet again. So I think we'll be talking about this tomorrow during the ministerial meeting in terms of way forward. We flagged this idea last year, and some of the wonderful ideas that were raised last year, some of them have not been actioned up to now. And so that calls for a very strong, inclusive secretariat that will make sure that we drive our actions and wishes forward, as well as internally within our own countries, establish systems that will promote the action. For example, in Swaziland, we have set up what we call an investor roadmap for both local and foreign investment. Amongst those things that are done there is to work on the ease of doing business, both across borders, and I'm happy to say between ourselves and Mozambique, for example, we have already cleared the issue of 24-hour border service system, and we are discussing with our colleagues in South Africa to have at least 2 of our border gates being opened 24 hours, and I'm hoping that again the benefits from the East3Route and the inputs will help expedite that process, because in Swaziland we are 100% open for business.
Thank you so much for your comments and feedback. We will continue with this conversation offline, Minister Artur. There's lots clearly for us to get into, but a big thank you to the studio audience as well as the ministers for participating in this discussion. The 2015 Investment Seminar for the East3Route. The conversation certainly does continue. For CNBC Africa, I'm Gugulethu Tele. Join us again next time.